Welcome back to Crystal Clear! I'm Vox, and when it comes to the rogues gallery of Steven Universe Future, one antagonist that I feel like I initially severely underrated was the fusion between Aquamarine and Eyeball, Bluebird Azurite, whose legitimate gemstone name seems to emerge from the title of the upcoming episode, Bluebird, which is shaping up to be this fusion's debut. Now, I want to share my thoughts on why I think this fusion is actually a force to be reckoned with. Why Bluebird is one of my most anticipated episodes of Steven Universe Future, if not out of the entire franchise, and briefly explore how just the existence of this fusion could have a serious detrimental impact on Steven's mental health. Of course, spoiler warning, if you do not want to know anything about Steven Universe Future beyond any promos or teasers, please click off now. With all that said, let's dive in. Right off the bat, we should refresh ourselves on who exactly we're dealing with. Because both Aquamarine and Eyeball didn't really have a big impact on the story of Steven Universe in its endgame, and instead their appearances were ultimately just moving pieces of the puzzle, it's easy to just write up their fusion as, oh yeah, they would both still probably hate Steven, and they would both probably resent the changes brought to Homeworld. So their inclusion in the story makes sense, and it's pretty awesome that they fused. Keeps things a little bit fresh. And while that isn't an improper deduction, one that I used to hold, it severely downplays what these characters have accomplished and what they'll continue to accomplish in the future. For Eyeball, she is, without a doubt, the gem who has gotten closest to killing Steven, assaulting Steven with her chisel immediately after having her gemstone healed and thus her life saved by our beloved protagonist, which in itself taught Steven a very valuable lesson about who he helps, and who he blindly trusts to change their tune after helping him. Eyeball was the first gem to cause Steven to ponder what would happen if my gemstone was removed. And she was really the first person Steven has ever turned his back on, being forced to toss her out into deep space. Finally getting the memo that sometimes he has to put himself first in order to help others. And some people won't even be grateful for his help, as Eyeball later testified against Steven in front of the Diamonds. But really let that sink in. Out of all of Steven's adversaries, when his life was on the chopping block, experiencing what was pretty much intended to be his final moments before being shattered, of all the gems to come forward and speak their piece, even if the Diamonds already had their mind made up, was Eyeball. So not only does she provide a very valuable lesson for Steven wrapped in trauma, she's someone who, evidently to this day, 2 years later, does not see Steven as an empathetic savior, or even just a nice dude, which from a certain perspective is validated with Steven throwing her out into space. Again, obviously he did what he had to do, but from Eyeball's perspective, Steven props himself as the guy who wants to help everyone, yet she was left floating in space for who knows how long. Regardless, Eyeball likely views Steven as a hypocrite and liar. Not to mention someone who had no respect for Homeworld's rules. Thus, it's obvious she would be very opposed to Steven taking the charge and turning things upside down on Homeworld. As for Aquamarine, I imagine her hatred is very much more surface level. She already wasn't too fond of Steven before he claimed that he was Rose Quartz, and his influence on Topaz likely kept her up for days. But gems will need to sleep anyways. Yeah, I imagine the biggest burn to her is the fact that her status no longer means anything, as she flaunted her importance to the Diamonds whenever she could. Aquamarine was the gem who brought Steven to Homeworld. The gem who, if it wasn't for very lucky circumstances, would have brought Steven to his death sentence, and was the catalyst for a very stressful time in his life where he and Connie weren't on speaking terms. So her negative impact on Steven can also be something that's felt throughout the series, even if she came in at the home stretch. Now, I feel like the lesson Steven will learn in Bluebird won't be one that echoes Room for Ruby, especially as the synopsis already states that Steven is suspicious of this gem, whereas he wasn't suspicious of Navy. But likely that experience with Navy, alongside the history with Eyeball and Aquamarine, is what keeps Steven on his toes. However, Steven likely assumes that this fusion exists for the wrong reason, and that's where the twist and lesson of the episode will lie. Listen, we can see this fusion turning on Steven from a mile away, something that will likely sting because, as I predicted, the title of the episode has me thinking that Steven will be the one to name this fusion, that they'll come to Steven unsure of what to be named because they know he and the Crystal Gems are all about that fusion life. And it's something that they would genuinely want. They would want Steven to give them a name because Steven's the reason they were brought together. And I think Steven will learn that just because these two are fused together due to their hatred for Steven, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a toxic relationship. I think they'll actually enjoy being fused together. They won't just be a retread of Jasper's various fusions. As Jasper said, no one she fused with ever wants to stay. Eyeball and Aquamarine, they would want to stay together. And a little motivation could go a long way. If their motivation is despising Steven, then if they put their mind to it and have the proper resources, they can seriously undo a lot of Steven's progress in relation to Gemkind. After all, while being the son of Pink Diamond obviously helped, the main thing that caused Steven to get to the point where he is was motivation, sticking to his core values. So what happens when that's flipped on the other side? Also, in terms of powers and weapons, we have to remember that fusions can get buffs. We know rubies have an inclination to fire, as aquamarines assumably have some sort of water abilities, going off both their wings and core as a whole, so with their powers combined, alongside that fusion boost in stats, they actually could be capable of wreaking havoc. Now, Aquamarine no longer has her wand, something that I'm now confident in saying 100% as the video game Unleash the Light, written by Rebecca Sugar and the core Steven Universe team, opens with Steven explaining the new rules of Era 3 to the Pearls. One of the rules being, all gems must turn in weapons of war. Now, obviously, you can't really have gems turn in weapons that they summon, as those weapons in themselves are manifested from light, but tools and vehicles are easy to confiscate. Well, easy as long as a gem is willing to submit. When they're not, you get the story of Unleash the Light. But this doesn't mean that we can't finally explore how gems are able to summon weapons, and that the Aquamarine component of this Bluebird fusion will actually be able to summon her own weapon that can combine with the chisel to create something devastating. And even if that's not the case, look at Garnet. Ruby has gauntlets, Sapphire has no weapon. But when fused as Garnet, those gauntlets get a serious upgrade. So I imagine the chisel wouldn't just be unaffected. It would actually evolve in both appearance and ability. Now, I'm not saying that Bluebird Azurite's gonna be the biggest antagonist in future, far from it. But for the reasons we ran down today, we should absolutely keep an eye on her. Now, just looking at the episode descriptions for Steven Universe Future and the episodes that air in December, a lot of these plot threads look loosely connected, but not really having an ongoing story arc. And while this could just be a clever way to throw people off the trail, I'm now under the impression that the first half of Future, the batch that we're getting in December, will be the self-contained adventures that set up a bigger story, and that the second half, whenever it airs in 2020, will actually put all the pieces together, and with that first half of Future being set up, will actually take us into the final story in the Steven Universe animated series. One that could involve this fusion once more. That's actually my hope. Jasper, the Lapis Lazuli twins, Bluebird Azurite, they'll all have their respective episodes in December, but when it comes to an actual tightly connected arc, that's when they'll come together and really shine, once we get a good understanding of their individual motives and situation. But as always, these are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this fusion, and what impact do you think they're going to have on Steven Universe Future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, or tweet your thoughts at Roundtable Vids. And for more of my own thoughts, you can find me at ARTWITHKODA. We're also on Instagram. Special thanks to ARTWITHKODA for creating an awesome thumbnail. For more of his wonderful art, you can find him on Tumblr and Instagram at ARTWITHKODA, and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Link down below in the description. Help Roundtable grow by either becoming a member of this channel or supporting us over at Patreon. Link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the Roundtable for more great cartoon content. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. ARTWITHKODA, signing out.